Good morning, this is Randy Landry, and this is my 18th podcast in my series, Common Sense and Ramblings in America. Today I'm going to be reading an article entitled Flip Flop Fauci, and you can read this article entirely in my blog, common-sense-in-america.com. So today I'm going to discuss, like I said, read my article or posting on Fauci and Dr. Fauci. I've posted several of these articles, and you can find them all in my blog under the headline Dr. Fauci. So, I will start by reading this article. In the Trump administration, he had the unique position with the press of actually being trusted. Otherwise, the press just kind of lambasted everything or President Trump said, and everything that Dr. Fauci said was gold. So, Dr. Fauci has been a medical advisor for several administrations, so his face has become familiar to most households. He was involved in the AIDS pandemic in the 1980s. His area of expertise is the field of virology. However, I notice one thing with Dr. Fauci. He always seems to take the opposite stance of the Trump administration. Every time he shuffled or did a two-step or flip-flop, President Trump got the blame for it. One major example is the drug hydroxychloroquine. There are several other examples as well. I have discussed them in previous articles, so I won't discuss them now. It would take way too long. A few weeks after he was announced by President Trump as the new senior advisor to the pandemic response team, which in fact was led by Vice President Pence, I started losing faith in him. I voiced my opinion in several of my earlier postings, and I have them in my blog as well, so you can see that I am not blowing smoke. I actually did find how he talked and discussed the pandemic is quite problematic. He is also in the unique position of being the only senior advisor in the Trump administration to still find a job under the Biden administration. So what's that saying? If Biden likes him, he can't be very good, right? Yeah, I kind of agree. All right. So when I think of Fauci's role in the Trump administration, one famous example comes to mind. The serpent in the Garden of Eden. Every individual of Christian faith knows the story of Adam and Eve and the serpent. The serpent corrupted Eve and convinced her to eat the fruit of the forbidden tree. When Fauci played a similar role in the Trump administration, he whispered words of dissent and divisiveness every chance he had, trying to make Trump look like a fool. He changed position so many times that many people stopped listening to him. And I am not the only one to call Dr. Fauci flip-flop Fauci, though I think I was one of the first ones to voice my doubts about him. He now continues this role under the Biden administration. However, it is now at the behest of the administration. He is being used as a tool to keep the general populace off guard and to keep them uncertain of their future. The left-leaning Democrats want the masses to be afraid of the virus so that they can maintain their stranglehold on us. In this article, I will chronicle his flip-flop record. In previous articles, I discussed his ties with China and his big pharma as well. Dr. Fauci has flip-flopped or been proven wrong on a host of different coronavirus measures and recommendations since the virus first hit the United States last winter in 2020. Fauci, the leading White House coronavirus task force member, has changed positions or faced scientific data proving his stances are flawed on issues ranging from mask wearing to the severity of the virus, and from asymptomatic spread to effective treatments for patients, among other issues, since January 2020. Interestingly enough, Dr. Fauci is the highest paid person in the U.S. government. Yep, it's true. He makes more than even the President of the United States. There's interesting things about his background as well, but those get into conspiracy theories, ideas, and discussions, which I usually try to avoid, like a rabid dog. Mainly because I don't like them at all. It's because they make me look stupid when I discuss them or repeat them. And I don't need any help in that matter. When President Trump was told about the seriousness of the virus, he stopped all travel from China to the U.S. Eventually, those travel restrictions affected other countries in the world, including the United Kingdom. What is interesting is when he did this, Dr. Fauci recommended against this move, saying that it was perfectly safe to fly on planes. Obviously, if we had the virus here in the United States, it didn't swim across the ocean, but it came across by transport, by a plane, or somebody who was contaminated from China. That's the quickest way. If it would have came by ship, it would have taken a lot longer. Sometime in February 2020, there was a discussion about the importance of wearing masks. And you can find a video clipping of that on the internet, as you can find pretty much anything else. Of course, when Donald Trump repeated what Dr. Fauci said about mask wearing, which was later proved that we did need them, Donald Trump was blamed. Fauci wasn't blamed at all, even though he is the one that advised Trump to say that. So, I don't know. What do you think about that? So, now Fauci has flip-flopped even more. He says one mask is not good, but two masks are better, or are good. So, in March 2020, news reporters and anchors of several networks asked Dr. Fauci about the public safety of going to restaurants, bars, public places, and sporting events, and so forth and so on. Dr. Fauci said it was perfectly okay, stating that much of these places were outdoors and the virus did not travel well or last long in these outdoor environments. Of course, Donald Trump, when he said this, he was lambasted. And even Pelosi, back in March, was visiting Chinatown in crowds of people, saying everything was perfectly safe. Well, we know that was a fallacy. Of course, Trump got blamed for all those things. Now, a study came out last year in South Korea stating that the COVID virus could travel up to 20 feet. And it only took times of exposure or cross-contamination with an infected individual of about 5 minutes or so. And the accepted distance had been 6 feet prior, which came from a study back in the 1890s. And nobody's even verified that those facts are true or not. And Fauci's just been going right along because what is he? He is lazy. And he doesn't like to be proven wrong, even when he is. So Dr. Fauci said that there was no way that we could have a vaccine in a year, and President Trump stated and proved him wrong. He actually did create the vaccine, and he created the whole infrastructure for the administration of the vaccine and transport and production of all the supplies needed in that time. Fauci thought it was going to be 2, 4, 5, maybe even 10 years before that was possible, so he was proven wrong there. Governors of many of these states, like New York, they did not trust anything that happened so fast. And they also were naysayers, and they said that that couldn't be done. But of course, as soon as the vaccines came out, they wanted to jump on the bandwagon and try to give it to all their friends instead of following the protocol of giving it to the people that needed it the most first. And Governor Cuomo is actually being held accountable for that. He gave it to his family and other people that he knows before the medical personnel and the elderly got it. So, and Biden and Kamala Harris, when they were running for office in 2020 for president, they said they would not take the vaccine that was produced by Trump. But if Dr. Fauci said it was okay, they would take it. Well, guess what? In November, they were some of the first people that got vaccinated. Wow, impressive, huh? Before anybody else could get vaccinated, they got vaccinated. So now they are pushing it left and right, and they're trying to make it mandatory in this country. How things change when they're in power now, okay? So every time that Dr. Fauci flip-flopped or made a mistake or a comment or whatever, President Trump was blamed and made to look like the rube. And I think part of it has to do with his stature. Have you ever noticed that people, especially men, not so much women, but men who are short of stature and in positions of power tend to overcompensate, and they don't like to be proven wrong, and they just really go over, like Napoleon, for instance. So People seem to fail to recognize that President Trump did not make the virus and he did not release it from China, so you can't blame him for the pandemic. Okay, he did what he could to eliminate or lessen the what the virus did, the effects of the virus, and he did really well. I mean, our infrastructure was depleted when he came into office, and so he had ventilators built, and now we're exporting ventilators. We were such a short of them, and we were short of needles. I mean, because the United States has become less of a productive country. We are we get all of our stuff from other countries. So when it came down to needing these supplies, we had to go into overdrive to try to get things switched around. And we're more like a service country economy, which is a very dangerous kind of economy to have. And COVID-19 is a virus. It's very unpredictable. So it's telling people that the government is able to just make a system to stop it, or well, we've been trying to do that for the flu, and we've been out fighting the flu since the Spanish flu in early 1900s. So we haven't been too successful in stopping the flu. We have a new vaccine every year, and that just reduces the spread of it a little bit, or the effects of it. And we still have tens of thousands of people die every year from the flu in the United States, and worldwide it's in the millions. So recently, Dr. Fauci faced off with Senator Rand Paul, a senator, and on a hearing on the coronavirus. And Paul repeatedly questioned Fauci last September on how pre-existing cross-reactive immunity could potentially stop the spread of COVID-19, citing facts from Asia. Fauci told Paul that there was no evidence for making this case. And he also has changed his position on school reopenings. On an ABC show this week, Fauci stated the default position should be to try as best as possible within reason to keep the children in school or to get them back to school. If you look at the data, the spread among children and from children is not really very big at all, not like one would have suspected. So let's try to get the kids back, but let's try to mitigate the things that maintain and just push the kind of community spread that we're trying to avoid. But Dr. Fauci hasn't always stated or sided with the data or supported proponents of reopening. Investigative reporter Jordan Satchel produced a detailed timeline in all the positions Dr. Fauci has taken on schools, noting that Fauci's latest remarks have finally caught up with the overwhelming data supporting opening schools. On April the 13th, 2020, Fauci slams Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who announced that at the time that he wanted to get schools open as soon as possible. Fauci claimed that opening the schools will get children infected with the coronavirus. If you have a situation where you don't have a real good control over an outbreak and you allow children together, they will likely get infected, Fauci proclaimed. In May 12, 2020, without evidence, Fauci claims COVID-19 is dangerous to children, citing Kawasaki syndrome as a potential outcome in school children. June 30th, 2020, testifying on Capitol Hill, Fauci says school reopenings depend on the dynamics of the outbreak. On July 15th, 2020, the NIAID chief supports looking at schools on a case-by-case basis. July 24th, Fauci continues to advance his vague ideas about school reopenings, but again makes it clear that he opposes having schools open in areas where the coronavirus is spreading. On August 4, Dr. Fauci calls for the continuing closure of schools in areas with high transmission and a hybrid learning system in areas with moderate transmission, and elaborating on a scaled approach that allows for schools to remain open based on unspecified area transmission numbers. In August the 4th, ABC reports that Fauci is still concerned that schools could be vectors for transmission of COVID-19. August the 13th, Fauci agrees that the future entails many months of virtual learning and supporting keeping schools physically closed. September the 3rd, Schools can only open back up once the virus is under control, Fauci tells CNN. On September 20th, Fauci declares that some schools may be able to open safely, but that places with COVID-19 transmission levels may want to pause before they start sending the kids back to school for a variety of reasons. On November the 29th, Fauci discovers that almost year-old data showing that schools are not vectors for COVID-19 transmission. He says in an ABC interview, but as I said in the past, the default position should be to try as best as possible within reason to keep the children in school or to get them back to school. I have shared much research and data from experts over the past several months on best practices to reopen schools in ways that minimize health and safety risks, that schools aren't super spreaders, and that there is a very little evidence that school closures have any reasonable public health effect or benefit against the spread. We can get our students safely back into the classroom. The flashpoint for Fauci's missteps have been his feud with Senator Rand Paul, who said that Fauci owes an apology to every single parent and school-aged child in America for resisting calls for students to go back to school and then reversing that position. Close the bars and keep the schools open, Fauci said during an appearance on ABC's This Week, adding that there is obviously not a one-size-fits-all approach to schooling. His comments come after months of President Trump and lawmakers demanding that schools must open and warning that the effects from lockdowns could be devastating. Studies from the U.S. and abroad have already shown that keeping children from schools has had serious consequences, with suicides among youths rising in Wisconsin. Children forgetting basic life skills in the United Kingdom, and overall increase of mental health related emergency departments visits for youth across the U.S. In November, however, Paul took a victory lap when the New York Times published research backing up his claims and showed that some adults and even more children carried an antibody that can prevent coronavirus infection, including COVID-19. But these are just the most recent examples of Fauci backtracking or being proven wrong. On March the 8th, he described lockdown measures in China as draconian and stated that such restrictions wouldn't be feasible in the U.S. More than a month after the World Health Organization declared a global emergency on January the 30th of 2020. Days later, on March the 15th, he changed positions and said he was open to a national 14-day shutdown to help stop the spread. In April, when pressed in a CNN interview on why social distancing and lockdowns weren't implemented sooner, he sparked confusion when he said more lives obviously could have been saved if there hadn't been pushback to lockdowns at the start of the pandemic. The very next day, he backtracked, saying that he had used the wrong choice of words. In September 2020, Fauci testified that he did not regret saying that the only way to stop the explosion of infection was by shutting down. Perhaps Fauci's most notable flip-flop has been on the efficacy of masks, saying in March that there was no reason to wear masks. By April, he joined the chorus of doctors and health agencies encouraging the use of face masks. Fauci also previously downplayed the virus itself, something Trump was harshly criticized for, saying in February that the public should not be frightened. By March, he was singing a different tune, warning people that they needed to do their part to stop the spread and to take the virus seriously. He also downplayed asymptomatic transmission in January the 28th of 2020, saying that people need to realize is that in all the history of respiratory-borne viruses, asymptomatic transmission has never been the driver of outbreaks. By August, Fauci did a complete 180, saying asymptomatic cases were a driving factor in the community spread of COVID-19, despite a WHO admission that more evidence was needed to make this determination. In late August, researchers from Southern Medical University in Gaza concluded that asymptomatic cases were less likely to infect their close contacts. Fauci warned in May hearing, while the school closures debate was ongoing, that Kawasaki disease, which caused inflammation in blood vessels in children, could be related to COVID-19. However, diagnoses of Kawasaki disease did not increase in 2020 compared to the dates from 2018 to 2019, according to the research released in November of 2020. Paul again directed his ire toward Fauci's COVID-19 advice last month, accusing him of glossing over the science. He believes that submission and lockdowns are fine, the senator said. He's not too worried about individual liberties, but he also tends to gloss over the science because we've had this debate back and forth about immunity. Fauci, however, has remained steadfast and vocal with the media that the science must be followed. He gives frequent updates that people must socially distance, follow local health orders, and brace for a holiday season rife with restrictions. Fauci referred to Trump's Rose Garden ceremony from Amy Coney Barrett's Supreme Court appointment as a super spreader event and called Trump's campaign rallies troublesome. But he has yet to answer repeated Washington Examiner inquiries regarding social distancing orders amid months of public protests and riots. In my conclusion, I hope this article has shown that the reader that Dr. Fauci is not a person to be trusted. The only comment he has made that has a veracity was made in early March of 2020 when he stated that fabric masks helped little with preventing the spread of the COVID virus. President Trump went into this presidency with a goal to drain the D.C. swamp. Unfortunately, this was the one thing he failed to do, and Dr. Fauci managed to slither his way to safety. As always, this concludes my ramblings, and please be safe and keep up the good fight. And until next week, you guys have a great day and take care.